At 7 a.m., the world woke up to a price surge no one thought possible, and behind it, a single demand from Donald Trump. News alerts blared across television screens, radio bulletins cut through morning commutes, and cell phones buzzed in kitchens and offices with the same chilling headline. Gas prices had jumped overnight and no one could escape it. Across the nation, Americans rushed to gas stations, their cars snaking in endless lines. Tempers flared, horns blared, and frustration spread like wildfire. Parents worried about affording the drive to work. Truckers sat stunned at pumps they could no longer fill, and families looked at the week ahead with a creeping sense of dread. This wasn't just a spike. It felt like the opening notes of a national crisis. Behind the chaos was one man's voice, louder than all others. Donald Trump, with his trademark bravado, had unleashed an ultimatum: tariffs on Saudi oil or betrayal of American strength. His demand wasn't measured policy. It was fire and fury, a declaration that the United States would no longer be played by foreign producers. His words struck with force, but also with recklessness, as though he were daring the world to defy him, and defy him they did. Within hours, Saudi Arabia slammed the door shut. No compromise, no hesitation, no soft words. Their rejection was swift, cold, and absolute. A slap across the face of America's former president, and by extension, every family now paying the price at the pump. The airwaves filled with outrage. Some praised Trump for standing tall, while others condemned him for gambling with livelihoods. But the truth was inescapable. Ordinary Americans were caught in the crossfire of a political gamble waged on the grandest stage. In living rooms, in carpool lines, in corner diners, the same anxious question echoed: if this is just the beginning, what happens next? Because this clash wasn't just about oil. It wasn't just about dollars and tariffs. It was about power, pride, and the fragility of a nation's energy lifeline. And as the morning unfolded, one thing became certain. The story had only begun, but this was just the first spark. The explosion that followed would shake every American home. America has always told itself a story of independence. A nation forged on self-reliance, a people proud of their ability to stand on their own 2 feet. And yet for decades, one of its deepest vulnerabilities has been hidden in plain sight: energy. Behind the soaring rhetoric of strength and freedom lay a truth that few wanted to acknowledge. The United States, the world's most powerful nation, remained tethered to foreign oil. The relationship with OPEC was never simple. It was a marriage of convenience, a balancing act between America's appetite and the cartel's control. Prices rose and fell like a pendulum, swinging not only with supply and demand but with politics, grudges, and whispered deals in back rooms far from American shores. Every time OPEC flexed its muscles, Washington bristled, yet compromise became the language of survival. And every time America boasted of energy independence, the reality proved more fragile than the slogan. That fragility is why this moment cut so deep. Trump's tariff demand had cracked the balance, and Saudi Arabia's rejection had widened the fault line into a chasm. The result was not abstract. It was immediate, personal, and brutal. Families who once budgeted carefully now watched their grocery bills climb as shipping costs soared. The weekly ritual of filling up the gas tank became a financial burden. Small businesses calculated what they could cut just to keep the lights on. Inflation, already a shadow on the horizon, now stormed into the forefront of American life. The fear wasn't only economic, it was psychological. For a country that prides itself on being untouchable, the idea that a foreign power could slam the door and send shockwaves into every kitchen, every commute, every small town, it was humiliation. America's pride was on the line, and its people could feel the sting of dependence. Commentators filled the airwaves with dire warnings. Economists spoke of cascading effects, analysts predicted market instability, and politicians scrambled to take sides. But beneath the statistics and sound bites was a more profound anxiety. If the United States could be shaken this easily, what did it mean for its standing in the world? If its energy lifeline could be cut, what did it say about the durability of its power? This was no longer about fuel alone. It was about identity, about whether America was still the unshakable giant it claimed to be, or whether arrogance had left it exposed, vulnerable to those who dared to challenge it. And yet, in the heart of this unfolding crisis, something deeper stirred. Because as Americans argued and markets panicked, the confrontation was becoming more than a geopolitical standoff. It was becoming a clash of egos, a test of wills, and a battle that reached far beyond the boardrooms of oil producers. The world was watching a spectacle of power. But what the world didn't see, not yet, was how personal this battle was about to become. Before we continue, let me ask for a quick favor. Our goal is to reach 5,000 subscribers, and your help is crucial. If you're enjoying this video, please subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss content like this. Thank you for your support. Donald Trump has always thrived on spectacle. From his earliest days on the campaign trail, he understood the power of a stage, the electricity of a crowd, and the irresistible pull of a simple slogan. America First was not just a catchphrase, it became his political gospel. And nowhere did he wield it more fiercely than in the world of energy. Standing at podiums draped with red, white, and blue, Trump declared that America would never again be held hostage by foreign powers. He promised complete energy independence, painting a picture of oil rigs rising like monuments across American plains, coal mines roaring back to life, and gas flowing so abundantly that the nation would dominate the world market. To his supporters, it was a vision of strength, an iron-fisted rejection of weakness and compromise. But beneath the bravado lay contradictions that could not be ignored. For all his talk of independence, America's energy reality told a different story. Even as domestic production rose, imports remained crucial. OPEC's decisions still rippled through U.S. markets, and Saudi Arabia remained a central player in stabilizing or destabilizing global prices. Trump's rhetoric sold the illusion of total control, while in practice the nation remained deeply entangled in the very networks he condemned. That contradiction never slowed him down. Instead, Trump bulldozed through it with his trademark style: deny, deflect, dominate. Diplomacy, the careful art of balancing interests, was dismissed as weakness. Allies who raised concerns were mocked, experts who pointed out risks were ignored, and long-standing energy relationships were treated as disposable props in his show of strength. Every move was designed for maximum drama, a press conference punchline here, a Twitter broadside there, all crafted to project the image of a man untethered, a leader who would bend reality itself to his will. Tariffs became his weapon of choice. For Trump, they weren't just economic tools. They were symbols of defiance, proof that he could force the world to play by his rules. When he turned that weapon toward Saudi oil, it was less about policy and more about pride. He wanted to show America and the globe that he could bring even the most entrenched players to heel. It wasn't negotiation, it was a dare. And yet the dare carried recklessness. The energy market is not a casino where chips are thrown for show. It is the bloodstream of global economies, fragile and interdependent. By threatening tariffs, Trump gambled with forces far larger than himself, betting that bluster would outweigh leverage. He mistook volume for power, assuming that shouting louder meant America would stand taller. This arrogance was not new. It was the same swagger that had marked his approach to trade wars, to NATO, to diplomacy itself. He saw international relations as zero-sum battles where respect could be extracted through intimidation. The idea that a partner, even one as central as Saudi Arabia, might refuse him outright was almost unthinkable. In his mind, rejection was impossible, because he was Donald Trump, and Donald Trump never lost. But reality was less forgiving. Behind closed doors, advisors warned of backlash, economists highlighted the risks, and diplomats whispered of strain with allies. Still, Trump pushed forward, convinced that force alone would bend the kingdom to his will. For him, this was not just about oil. It was about ego, about proving that no one, Not even America's most significant energy partner could defy him without consequence. The stage was set for confrontation. Trump, the self-styled master negotiator, had drawn a line in the sand with bravado and fury. He believed the kingdom would blink first, that they would yield to his demand rather than risk his wrath. But he underestimated the pride on the other side, the quiet resolve of a nation unwilling to be bullied on the world stage. For Trump, it was just another battle to win. For Saudi Arabia, it was something else entirely. A chance to remind the world, and Trump himself, that not every opponent could be steamrolled, not every ally could be humiliated into submission. The ultimatum was sent. The rejection came, swiftly. And as prices soared and panic spread, the truth began to dawn. This was no ordinary policy fight. It was the collision of arrogance and dignity, of bluster and restraint. But across the ocean, a kingdom prepared to humiliate the world's loudest man. While Trump thundered with slogans and threats, there was another figure who rarely sought headlines. A quiet force in Washington, respected on both sides of the aisle, known less for fiery speeches and more for careful strategy. To some, he was the last of a fading breed, a public servant who carried scars of past crises and lessons paid for in long nights and lonely battles. He was, for the purposes of this story, the energy stabilizer. His journey did not begin in opulent boardrooms or gilded towers. It began in modest roots in a working-class family where every dollar mattered and where the sting of rising fuel costs was not an abstract statistic but a daily burden. He knew what it meant when parents had to choose between filling the tank or filling the fridge. That early reality shaped his path, driving him to study economics, energy policy, and the fragile machinery that kept America's lights on and its trucks moving. By the time he rose to national prominence, he carried with him not just credentials but credibility. He had served through the oil shocks of the past, watched inflation tear into families, and had seen firsthand how reckless decisions at the top could cascade down to the most vulnerable. His voice was steady, his demeanor calm, and his warnings persistent. America's so-called energy independence was far more fragile than politicians wanted to admit. He spoke of diversification, of renewable investments, of diplomacy over bluster. Not flashy, not dramatic, but deeply pragmatic. In closed-door meetings, he would caution against tariff wars and reckless demands. He argued that energy was not a weapon to be brandished, but a lifeline to be protected. And yet time and again his counsel was ignored. In the age of sound bites and social media theatrics, reason was drowned out by rage. Still, he persisted. Because for him, public service was not about applause but responsibility. He was the kind of leader who carried binders of data into hearings, not for show but for preparation. He understood the labyrinth of global oil markets, the intricate deals that kept supply chains flowing. He knew that every policy decision rippled outward into real lives. When others mocked him for being too cautious, he reminded them that caution was not weakness. It was wisdom born from experience. And it was that very caution that allowed him to see what others refused to. Long before Trump's ultimatum, he warned of the dangers of bullying Saudi Arabia. He pointed out that tariffs would not create independence but expose fragility. He noted that while America produced vast amounts of oil, it remained deeply enmeshed in global pricing structures. You could not shout away interdependence. You could only navigate it with dignity and foresight. Those words went largely unheeded. Cameras flocked to Trump's podiums, not to the stabilizer's quiet press conferences. Headlines preferred outrage to reason. Yet when the crisis erupted, it was his past warnings that began to echo with startling clarity. What made him compelling was not only his knowledge but his character. He had sacrificed personal comfort for public service, often choosing duty over ambition. While others chased lucrative corporate posts, he stayed in the trenches of policy, drafting plans that would rarely be celebrated but would prevent disasters. He was a man who believed that the truest test of leadership was not how loudly one could speak, but how firmly one could stand when chaos demanded calm. To immigrant families, to working-class communities, to those who felt invisible in the roar of politics. He became a symbol of dignity. Not a celebrity, not a showman, but someone who embodied the values of humility, resilience, and service. When Trump framed energy as a battlefield of arrogance, the stabilizer framed it as a responsibility of care. Where Trump demanded loyalty through fear, the stabilizer earned respect through reason. In the public imagination, he was not flashy enough to be called a hero. But in the quiet corners of America, in the homes of truckers, the kitchens of single mothers, the late-night debates of students, his words resonated. He became the voice people replayed when the noise was too much. The contrast could not have been starker. One man roaring about dominance, the other urging dignity, restraint, and unity. And in the heart of the energy showdown, this contrast would matter more than anyone realized. Because as Trump escalated, the stabilizer's moment approached. A man who had been sidelined, underestimated, ignored, would soon find himself thrust into the center of history's stage. The world didn't yet know it, but the quiet voice of reason was about to become the steady hand against chaos, and when the showdown finally erupted, the hero would rise against chaos itself. The clash did not unfold in quiet chambers or hushed negotiations. It erupted in the open, broadcast across the globe like a high-stakes prize fight. On one side, Donald Trump, bristling with anger, stood before cameras and declared that America would not be bullied by Saudi Arabia. His words were sharp, his tone defiant, each syllable delivered like a clenched fist. He painted the Saudis as manipulators, accused them of exploiting American families, and promised that tariffs would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. His voice rose, fists pounded the podium, and supporters cheered as though he were battling a personal enemy rather than negotiating energy policy. The response from Riyadh could not have been more different. Saudi officials, dressed in their flowing robes, issued statements with measured calm. No shouting, no theatrics, no flurry of threats. Just a firm, icy rejection. The kingdom would not bow to ultimatums. Their refusal was delivered with a dignity that stung more than any insult. A subtle reminder that arrogance was not strength. To the world, the contrast was striking. One side screaming, the other steady, and the gap between them widening with each passing day. Markets reacted with panic. Oil prices spiked, stocks wavered, and ordinary Americans felt the squeeze almost instantly. Truck drivers watched their profits vanish as fuel costs devoured their earnings. Families canceled weekend plans just to save enough for the commute to work. Small businesses trimmed staff hours, unable to bear the weight of inflation that now loomed over every transaction. The energy crisis was no longer a headline. It was a storm, battering households across the country. The media turned it into a frenzy. Every network carried the drama live, split screens flashing Trump's fiery declarations alongside Saudi Arabia's calm refusals. Pundits filled the air with speculation. Was this the moment America would finally assert its dominance? Or was the president playing a reckless hand that could unravel the economy? Social media amplified every outburst. Memes mocked Trump's rage, hashtags surged in support or condemnation, and millions of Americans found themselves pulled into the theater of conflict. And yet, amid the noise, one figure emerged with a different tone. The energy stabilizer, calm, composed, deliberate, appeared in interviews not to fan flames but to explain. His words cut through the hysteria. Energy is not a weapon for pride. It is a lifeline for families. He spoke of the delicate interdependence that tied nations together, warning that shouting louder would not lower prices, but careful negotiation might. Where Trump's speeches felt like accelerant, the stabilizer's explanations felt like water on a fire threatening to consume the country. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Trump raged like a storm, dismissing allies, mocking experts, and demanding loyalty. The stabilizer spoke softly, laying out the stakes with clarity, dignity, and resolve. One voice thundered for power, the other steadied the nation's nerves. And while Trump's bluster made headlines, it was the stabilizer's calm that began to resonate in living rooms and workplaces across America. But the storm only grew. Tensions mounted, inflation gnawed, and the sense of national humiliation deepened as the world watched America's struggle unfold. Everyone wondered, how long could this continue? Could Trump force the kingdom to yield, or would his gamble break America before it broke Saudi Arabia? The stage was set for a dramatic turning point, and as both sides dug in, one roaring, the other unmoved, Americans braced themselves for what would come next. Then came the counterattack, a mic drop moment America would never forget. The world had grown accustomed to the storm. Day after day, Donald Trump thundered from podiums, shaking fists and promising victory through tariffs. His voice filled the airwaves, his anger dominated headlines, his bravado swallowed the nation's attention whole. Yet storms, for all their power, eventually exhaust themselves, and when the hurricane of Trump's fury seemed ready to consume the nation entirely, a new sound emerged. It was not a shout. It was not rage. It was calm. The energy. Stabilizer stepped onto the stage in Washington with a stillness that immediately felt like a rebuke. No fist-pounding, no insults, no walls of red-faced fury. Just a man carrying the weight of history on his shoulders, ready to speak truth in a way America had nearly forgotten. Behind him, the flags hung heavy, and before him, a restless audience leaned forward, desperate for clarity. Cameras from across the globe zoomed in, waiting to see if reason could still stand against rage. He began simply. "My fellow Americans," he said, his voice deliberate, almost quiet. "We are not in the middle of an energy crisis because of strength. We are here because of pride." The room stilled. He did not mention Trump by name. He did not need to. His words carved directly into the heart of the chaos, naming the arrogance without ever speaking it aloud. With every pause, with every measured breath, he dismantled the theater of rage that had dragged the country into panic. He reminded the nation of history. Tariffs have been tried before. In the 1930s, they deepened a depression that swallowed millions of families into poverty. Tariffs are not shields, they are walls. Walls that trap us inside our own mistakes. His voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in conviction. We cannot build prosperity by isolating ourselves from the world. We cannot claim independence while depending on every gallon at the pump. The audience shifted, murmurs rippling through the crowd. On screens across the country, viewers nodded. Families who had watched their grocery bills climb, truckers who had felt crushed by fuel prices, small business owners who had feared layoffs. They heard in his words a recognition of their struggle. For the first time in weeks, someone was speaking not to stoke fear, but to offer dignity. Then came the moral strike. Leadership is not volume. Leadership is not demanding others kneel while our own families suffer. Leadership is sacrifice. It is patience. It is understanding that America's greatness has never come from bullying but from building. We do not need enemies to prove our strength. We need solutions to honor our people. The cameras caught faces in the crowd. Eyes wet with emotion, jaws set with determination. On social media, hashtags began to spark. Dignity over pride. Leadership is calm. Energy for families. In real time, the nation was shifting. He turned his words toward the Saudis, not with threats, but with unflinching honesty. To our partners, abroad, America does not ask for surrender. We ask for respect, and respect is earned not by ultimatums, but by fairness. Let us remember that every barrel of oil carries not just dollars, but lives, and those lives depend on cooperation, not conflict. Saudi Arabia's response was silence, and silence in diplomacy speaks louder than fury. The stabilizer's cadence grew stronger, his logic building like a crescendo. A tariff may win applause for a day, but it will cost families for a generation. A tariff may feel like power, but it empties pockets faster than it fills pride. A tariff is not a policy. It is a tantrum, painted in the colors of patriotism. The line hung in the air like a blade. Gasps filled the room. Networks replayed the sentence instantly. Commentators called it surgical, devastating, unforgettable. For the first time, Trump's bravado seemed to falter. Cameras caught him watching. From a distant rally, lips pressed tight, eyes darting. His swagger thinned, replaced by the unmistakable weight of someone being outmaneuvered not by louder shouting but by undeniable truth. The stabilizer paused, letting the silence stretch. Then, with piercing precision, he asked the question that would echo far beyond Washington. Do we want a leader who fights for his pride, or do we deserve a leader who fights for our families? The room erupted. Applause thundered like a wave rolling across the stage, drowning out doubt. In living rooms, people clapped along with the crowd, some with tears in their eyes. On highways, truckers honked their horns in support. Videos of the moment flooding TikTok and Twitter. Hashtags exploded. Guy and families first. Mic drop moment. Reason wins. And still, the stabilizer pressed forward, layering logic atop dignity, weaving economics with morality, history with hope. We cannot gamble the future of our children on the roll of political dice. We cannot let one man's pride write the checks that every American mother and father must cash at the gas pump. We deserve better. We are better. And if America is to lead, it will not be through tantrums. It will be through courage, cooperation, and compassion. Every phrase was a hammer striking down Trump's narrative. Every example, every moral lesson, chipped away at the illusion that tariffs equaled strength. By the time he neared his close, the room was no longer tense. It was electric. He ended with a line that would be replayed for years. Energy is the bloodstream of a nation. It does not belong to one man's pride, but to every child who needs light to study, every worker who needs fuel to provide, every family who deserves dignity at the dinner table. That is who we fight for. That is why we will not fall. The eruption of applause was overwhelming. Standing ovations surged across the chamber. Commentators on every network declared it the defining speech of the crisis. Hashtags flooded timelines with millions of voices lifting the same message. America was tired of chaos, ready for clarity, hungry for leadership grounded in reason. For Trump, it was a moment of visible fracture. The cameras captured his reaction, forced smiles that couldn't hide the unease, strained defenses that landed flat, bravado struggling to survive against the weight of undeniable truth. His storm had met the mountain, and the storm was breaking, and yet, even as the stabilizer's words echoed across America and the world, the story was far from over, because the true shock was still to come. The moment that would transform speeches into movement, calm into action, dignity into power. But the real shock came not from Washington, but from millions of Americans rising together. The speech ended, but its vibrations did not. They rippled outward like the aftershocks of an earthquake, unsettling every corner of the political, economic, and global stage. Within hours, the markets stirred. Oil futures that had been spiraling upward slowed, steadied, and dipped. Street, jittery for weeks, exhaled with cautious relief. Traders whispered what analysts began saying openly. Rhetoric could move prices, but reason could stabilize them. The mic drop moment was not just a political headline, it was a market signal. Saudi Arabia, too, felt the tremor. Riyadh had braced for escalation, for another round of Trump's chest-beating and tariff threats. Instead, the calm but firm rebuke from the stabilizer forced a recalibration. Officials quietly huddled in gilded offices weighing their next move. A tariff war would cost them as well, but an America that chose dialogue over rage posed a more unpredictable challenge. To concede too much would look like weakness. To press too hard risked uniting Washington in ways they hadn't expected. For a kingdom accustomed to wielding oil as a blunt instrument, the game suddenly grew delicate. Meanwhile, the media erupted. Networks replayed the stabilizer's speech in primetime loops, each pause and phrase dissected like scripture. Pundits filled panels, some in awe, others skeptical. One commentator called it a turning point in American energy politics. Another scoffed that it was eloquence without action. But no one denied its impact. On social media, The moment ignited like dry tinder. The hashtags trended by the hour. Energy dignity, tariff showdown, mic drop moment, families first. TikTok. Edits paired the stabilizer's calm delivery with cinematic soundtracks. Twitter users clipped the line, "A tariff is not a policy, it is a tantrum," and spread it like wildfire. Memes bloomed overnight. Trump's red-faced shouts, juxtaposed against the stabilizer's stillness, captions reading, "Volume isn't leadership." But the split was real. Trump loyalists rallied online, framing the speech as weakness disguised as wisdom. "We need fighters, not philosophers," one viral post screamed, gathering thousands of shares. Conservative talk radio thundered that the stabilizer's call for cooperation was code for surrender. For every crime's energy dignity, there was a counter hashtag, "Stand with Trump." The divide sharpened, and yet the undeniable truth lingered. The stabilizer had shifted the center of gravity. For the first time, Trump looked less like the inevitable force and more like a man being questioned. Globally, the reaction was just as stark. In Brussels, EU leaders privately sighed with relief. They had feared America's tariffs would trigger a domino of trade retaliation, collapsing fragile energy diplomacy. In Tokyo, newspapers praised the return of American reason. In Moscow and Beijing, however, strategists leaned closer to their maps, calculating opportunities. If America was divided, if leadership was contested, there was leverage to be seized. Rivals saw cracks forming, and cracks could be widened. At home, the human impact was just beginning to show. For families who had rationed their driving, who had feared empty fridges and rising bills, the stabilizer's words carried more than policy. They carried hope. Across truck stops, diners, and union halls, people repeated the line that seemed to belong to them now. Do we want a leader who fights for his pride, or do we deserve a leader who fights for our families? Cable networks replayed truckers honking, horns in solidarity, families clapping at their televisions, students holding handmade signs quoting the stabilizer's speech. It was as if the dignity he spoke of had found its way into ordinary lives, reminding people that politics was not just noise. It was survival, pride, and the price of fuel at the pump. Trump, of course, did not retreat quietly. His rallies grew louder, his insults sharper. He dismissed the stabilizer as boring and soft, his voice dripping with contempt. Yet the more he shouted, the more it contrasted with the speech that had captured the nation. His fury, once entertaining, now seemed exhausting. His pride, once framed as power, now appeared brittle. In the halls of Congress, whispers turned into strategy sessions. Lawmakers who had feared crossing Trump began floating alternatives, drafting quiet bipartisan energy frameworks that nodded toward the stabilizer's vision. It was not yet a rebellion, but it was no longer submission. The world had shifted. Markets steadied. Saudi Arabia hesitated. The media convulsed. America argued. And global capitals recalculated. But beneath the noise, one truth pulsed steady. Something had cracked in the myth of Trump's invincibility. And as the stabilizer's words echoed across living rooms and boardrooms alike, one lesson began to rise, louder than hashtags, louder than headlines, louder even than Trump's voice. Yet through all the chaos, one lesson began to echo louder than any headline. When the dust finally settled, the lesson was unmistakable. The chaos of threats, tariffs, and angry words had only fueled fear. But calm reason, delivered with dignity, had steadied both the markets and the people. In the end, it wasn't the loudest voice that won, it was the clearest. Energy independence, the stabilizer reminded America, was never going to be achieved by shouting into microphones or hammering allies with ultimatums. True independence wasn't a spectacle, it was strategy. It was investment. It was the slow, patient building of resilience, diversifying energy sources, supporting innovation, protecting households, and cooperating when necessary. It was about courage without arrogance, strength without cruelty. The moral was universal, one that transcended the moment. Arrogance always collapses under its own weight. Dignity endures. Trump's fire had burned hot, but it consumed everything around it. The stabilizer's calmness, by contrast, built bridges between citizens and their leaders, between America and the world, between fear and hope. Ordinary Americans knew the truth instinctively. Parents didn't care about tariff battles or foreign slights. They cared about the cost of filling a gas tank so they could drive their kids to school. Truckers didn't want rhetoric about betrayal. They wanted stability in diesel prices so they could keep delivering goods. Small businesses didn't crave sound bites about toughness. They needed predictability to plan payrolls and keep the lights on. The hero of this story wasn't just a political figure. It was the dignity of the American people themselves, who wanted to live without being dragged into wars of pride. And in that realization lay the real triumph. For once, the noise of politics was stripped away, revealing what mattered most: truth, service, unity. These were the values that endured, the ones that spoke louder than tantrums or insults. They were not glamorous. They didn't trend for long, but they built the foundation of a country that could withstand shocks, whether economic, political, or moral. The stabilizer's message resonated because it wasn't about one man's power. It was about everyone's survival. It wasn't about pride. It was about responsibility. It wasn't about winning today's fight. It was about ensuring tomorrow's security. That was the kind of leadership Americans realized they longed for. Leadership that served them, not itself. And so the energy crisis became more than a test of oil markets. It became a mirror, forcing America to ask, what kind of strength do we respect? Do we honor the voice that shouts the loudest or the one that guides the farthest? Do we want leaders obsessed with their own pride, or leaders dedicated to protecting our families' futures? The answer was found not in tariffs or tweets, but in something timeless: the strength of dignity. For dignity doesn't collapse under pressure. It grows, it gathers, it inspires. The resolution, then, was not just political but moral. America's true energy independence would come not from bullying, but from resilience. Not from bluster, but from wisdom. Not from arrogance, but from unity. And the final word belonged not to the man who demanded tariffs, nor even to the one who calmed the storm, but to the people themselves, a people who proved that, in the end, stability mattered more than noise. As the headlines faded and the market stabilized, the moral echoed: pride may shout, but dignity speaks. And it is dignity that endures. Trump demanded tariffs. He demanded obedience. He demanded the world bend to his will. But in the end, America demanded something far greater. America demanded dignity. That is the true story of this showdown. Not the headlines about markets or the spectacle of insults, but the reminder that our nation's strength has never come from arrogance. It has always come from resilience, from the people who keep driving forward no matter the cost, from the voices who refuse to be silenced by bluster, from the calm leaders who place service above self. And this moment will be remembered not for a man's demand, but for a people's response. We showed that truth still matters, that stability still matters, that dignity endures long after the noise fades away. But here's the challenge. This story doesn't end when the camera cuts, or when the markets settle. It continues with us and with you. Because every time we choose dignity over arrogance, truth over distortion, community over division, we write the next chapter of America's resilience. So if you believe that leadership is more than shouting, if you believe that our future belongs not to the loudest voice but to the strongest values, then stand with us. Share this message. Add your voice. Let the world know that Americans demand more than pride wars. We demand stability, truth, and dignity. Subscribe, share, and raise your voice. Because in the end, the only thing louder than arrogance is the sound of a people united.